I received that very first email on a slow Tuesday afternoon. Its subject line simply read, "Are you bored?" "Yeah, I am," I muttered, leaning back in my worn office chair. Every day was slow at this office. My boss didn't give a crap, and frankly, neither did I. Most of the time, I wasn't even entirely sure what my job was. Officially, I was a data entry clerk. In reality, I had maybe 2 hours of actual work per day, leaving me another 6 to stare at my screen or fiddle with my phone, or zone out into nothingness. I clicked on the email, scanning through it skeptically. It read, "Are you dissatisfied with your life? Do you need more structure? We can help. Visit our site and sign up today." Obvious scam, I chuckled to myself. But boredom is a powerful motivator, and a virus might have given me something interesting to deal with. I activated my antivirus software, fired up my VPN, and clicked the provided link. The webpage was stark white with bold black letters at the top. 8.5 rules to survive the supernatural and other strange occurrences. Below it was a simple question. Do you accept? With options for yes or no. I hesitated briefly, grinning. A rock was probably more superstitious or spiritual than I had ever been. Ghosts, demons, supernatural rules, none of that was real to me. Still, I had literally nothing better to do, so I clicked yes. A large thank you flashed across the screen. I laughed quietly, shaking my head as I logged off and stretched. A good time for coffee, I whispered to myself. I headed into our break room, the stale odor of crackers and burnt coffee welcoming me as usual. The sound of the coffee machine droned on, accompanied by faint coughing and the occasional sniffle from coworkers whose names I barely knew. The break room was possibly the most depressing place in the building, which was really saying something. "Jamie, my man, what's up, dog?" came Patrick's voice, shattering my fragile sense of peace. I cringed internally. If small talk was torture, small talk with Patrick was like being waterboarded. Patrick, blissfully unaware of this, considered us to be friends. He also had an uncomfortable habit of watching adult things right there in his cubicle during work hours, something that our boss conveniently overlooked. Once, I had been on a customer call when Patrick's cubicle echoed with unmistakable satisfaction sounds. The customer, understandably, had been deeply confused, and I had wanted nothing more than for the ground to open up and swallow me whole. Patrick immediately launched into some irrelevant story, gesturing emphatically with his hands. "Uh-huh," I said occasionally. "Wow, that's cool," while completely zoning out. My coffee had finally finished brewing. I poured myself a cup, added cream and sugar, and began stirring absent-mindedly. Lifting the cup to my lips, I froze mid-motion. Behind Patrick, beyond his wildly flailing arms, something caught my eye. A ghostly pale hand curled around the break room doorway, fingers twitching erratically. My heart lurched, but I forced a smile. It had to be some kind of prank, an attempt to inject some life into this monotonous hellscape. A head followed the hand, and then a torso, and then legs. A woman staggered into the room, somewhere in her mid-30s, though decay made age difficult to determine. Her skin was blotchy, pale, and rotting, patches falling away like old wallpaper. The sickly sweet scent of decomposition mingled unsettlingly with the fresh coffee. She wore a familiar green apron with a name tag pinned crookedly to it reading, "Hi, my name is Shannon." Grinning even wider, I watched her approach, waiting for a coworker to acknowledge the absurdity of the moment. But nobody looked up. Not even Patrick, despite her passing close enough to him. She stumbled directly toward me, eyes cloudy yet focused. Stopping inches away, she reached out, grabbed my coffee cup, and pretended to pour something invisible into it, her bony fingers shaking slightly. She handed it back with a grotesque, toothy smile before stumbling away out of sight. I chuckled nervously, glancing around. Still, no one reacted. The hairs on my arms prickled with unease. Something felt off now, the prank growing less amusing by the second. Patrick stared at me, irritation and confusion etched onto his face. "Bro, are you deaf or something?" he demanded. I blinked. "What?" I startled. "I've been trying to get your attention for like the past 5 minutes. You've been standing there staring off into space." "Seriously?" I said, trying to laugh it off. Patrick didn't budge. "Yeah, man, seriously. Are you feeling okay?" "Yeah, just tired," I lied, forcing another laugh. Patrick gave a dubious grunt and turned away, shaking his head. I looked down at the cup of coffee that Shannon had prepared for me. It looked normal and smelled normal, yet something tugged at the back of my mind, screaming at me to put it down. Still, out of sheer awkwardness and defiance, I took a sip. Immediately, I spat the liquid out, narrowly missing Patrick, who jumped back in disgust. "Dude, what the heck?" he snapped, backing away toward the door. "Something's seriously wrong with you today." Ignoring him, I stared at the cup. It had the texture of motor oil and the acrid medicinal taste of Dayquil. Stomach turning, I slammed the cup onto the counter and hurried back to my cubicle. Coworkers glancing up from their screens to follow me with curious eyes. My hands trembled slightly as I logged back onto my computer. There at the top of my inbox was another new email, sender unknown. The subject line read simply, "Rule number 1, never stir your coffee counterclockwise." Over the next week, I adjusted my routine to accommodate rule number 1. At first, I slipped up out of sheer habit, sleepily stirring counterclockwise without even thinking. Each mistake summoned Shannon, the ghostly barista, creeping silently from dark corners, stumbling awkwardly into the kitchen. She would mutter unintelligibly while pouring imaginary ingredients into my coffee, turning it into something thick, vile, and medicinal in taste. The first couple of times it was horrifying. By Thursday, I just sighed and dumped the corrupted coffee down the sink. How do you even wrap your brain around something like this? I initially blamed hallucinations or some twisted prank by Patrick and the others at work. Maybe they slipped something into my food to mess with me. I wouldn't put it past them. But deep down, I knew this wasn't ordinary. This was something that I couldn't logically explain away. It was disturbing, but by Friday, I was an expert at stirring clockwise. That Sunday evening, as I lay on my couch, dreading another week of pointless drudgery, my phone vibrated. It was another email from the mysterious sender. I opened it, my pulse quickening slightly. Rule 2. Do not watch horror movies after midnight without covering your feet. I stared at it skeptically, almost laughing. Another silly superstition. Another harmless rule. Feeling a bit defiant, I glanced at the clock. 11:23 p.m. and decided to test it out, throwing caution to the wind. I turned on my favorite movie, John Carpenter's The Thing, purposely kicking the blanket away from my feet as the movie began. The clock rolled past midnight without me even noticing. I was engrossed, right up until the scene where Bennings was caught mid-transformation. A sudden icy tickle crawled up my feet, like tiny frozen fingers lightly brushing against my skin. Quickly, I reached for the blanket, but it was like my body had become encased in invisible ice. Panic surged through me as the sensation climbed up my calves and then to my thighs, immobilizing me in an escalating wave of numbing dread. Desperately, I managed to shut off the TV. The instant the screen went dark, warmth flooded back into my legs, the ice-cold paralysis evaporating as if it had never happened. I sat there panting, heart hammering, realizing sleep would be elusive tonight. The next day at work was rough. A sleep deprivation gnawed at my sanity, and I tried to find some logical explanation. Searching my email archives and forums yielded nothing. It was as if the original emails had never existed, wiped away clean from reality, leaving only my handwritten notes as proof. My sense of reality began leaking from my mind like water dripping from a faucet left open. Still, despite the terror, I had to admit my life had become significantly less mundane. Friday afternoon finally arrived, bringing with it the promise of 2 days free from monotonous work and Patrick's unfiltered commentary. Just as I was packing up, another email pinged on my phone. Rule 3. Avoid taking out the trash during a full moon. I stared at my screen and whispered the rule aloud, immediately looking up the next full moon exactly 2 weeks from today. I jotted it down in a notebook, determined to respect this one. Yet as the days passed by, my curiosity and boredom overtook caution, and when the full moon had arrived, I found myself carelessly carrying the trash toward the apartment's compactor, the moonlight bright and almost hypnotizing. Staring up at the glowing lunar orb made my problems feel insignificant. That tranquil moment was shattered by a honking car snapping me back to reality. Embarrassed, I waved awkwardly and tossed my garbage into the compactor, dramatically wiping my hands clean. I lingered, waiting for something supernatural, something horrifying. 30 uneventful minutes later, disappointment weighed on me. I began to turn back toward home when a scurrying shadow caught my attention. A small rat darting toward the compactor. I followed cautiously, shining my flashlight into the dark compartment, catching the rodent greedily nibbling on the trash. It turned, hissed sharply at the sudden beam of light, and disappeared deeper inside. Shrugging it off, I headed home, disappointed but relieved nothing worse had happened. And that relief lasted mere days. The next time I took out the trash, opening the compactor door revealed something straight out of a nightmare. My breath caught in my throat and the bag slipped from my hands. That rat had grown to the size of a large dog. It turned to face me, its black eyes reflecting the weak street lamp. Drool dripped from its enormous incisors, and a low, predatory hiss erupted from deep within its throat. I slammed the lid shut, heart pounding in terror. Before I could even step away, a thunderous bang echoed from within, the rat beast throwing itself violently against the metal door. It knew that I was there and it was hungry. I booked it and sprinted back to my apartment, locking the door behind me and sinking to the floor, mind racing with questions. In the following days, reports trickled in. Pets gone missing, neighbors whispering anxiously about sightings of an enormous creature lurking at night. Eventually, missing pet flyers gave way to missing person reports. A new urban legend took root. Locals spoke in hushed voices about a giant, monstrous rat that prowled the area under the full moon, snatching away anybody foolish enough to wander outside alone. Each new disappearance stoked my guilt and gnawed at my conscience. I had unleashed this horror simply out of boredom and negligence. It was my fault. My careless disrespect of the rules had endangered innocent people. Yet over the weeks that followed, the disappearances stopped. The creature seemed to vanish as mysteriously as it had appeared. During this time, a deep and gnawing guilt settled into my bones. That rat was my responsibility. Those missing pets, the frightened whispers around the neighborhood, it all traced back to me. I had spent my entire life bored and careless, unaware that my selfishness could hurt others. Now that it had, it forced me to reevaluate everything. I resolved to treat these rules with a newfound respect, aware now of how casually I neglected the consequences, not just for myself but for everybody else around me. There was still 5.5 rules ahead, and what the 0.5 meant at the time, I had absolutely no clue. One evening, while spinning idly in my desk chair at home, lost in thought about what I had done and how I could be better, my eyes fell on something unusual perched atop my bookshelf. It was a porcelain Nico cat statue, the kind you would see waving from the counter of an old family-run Chinese restaurant. Only I knew that I had never owned one before. It was aged, chipped around its paws, the paint faded and worn. Its eyes weren't just closed, they were squeezed shut, forcefully sealed. I stopped spinning, staring intently at it for a full minute, almost daring it to move. My phone buzzed. It was the familiar ding of an email notification, and I felt my pulse quicken as I picked it up. The screen read simply, Rule 4. Always pet the cat when her eyes are open. My eyes snapped back to the statue, relief washing over me when I saw that its eyes were still tightly shut. A shiver ran down my spine at the thought of meeting whatever gaze hid beneath those lids. I considered tossing the statue immediately, throwing it in the dumpster and washing my hands of whatever horrors awaited. But flashes of the rat creature in those cold dark eyes haunted me. These rules were no joke. Reluctantly, I noted Rule 4 in my growing notebook of precautions. The following day, I had a few friends over. It was supposed to be a break from the insanity that I had been dealing with. A relaxing night of Mario Kart, combining cheap beer with classic Mario Kart. Just as I stood up, wobbling slightly from the alcohol, laughter echoing behind me, something across the room drew my attention. My stomach dropped. The cat statue's eyes were wide open and unnaturally bright, fixated directly onto me. Its porcelain head had turned slightly, matching my stare. The laughter behind me dulled into silence as my friends noticed that I had gone rigid. You good, dude? Zach slurred, his voice slightly concerned beneath the haze of alcohol. I nodded stiffly, forcing out a weak smile. Both Zach and James were now silent, watching me cautiously. Slowly, feeling ridiculous, I walked across the room to the statue and placed a trembling hand atop its head. My fingers brushed against its cold surface, and mercifully the eyes gradually closed again, the head shifting gently back into its original position. I turned awkwardly, catching the confused looks of my friends. Zach burst out laughing. "Bro, how drunk are you?" James joined in, beer spraying from his mouth. "Seriously, dude, are you good? You need to get out more." I forced out a laugh, masking my dread and embarrassment, eyes still darting suspiciously to the statue, which thankfully remained still. Over the next few days, I meticulously checked the statue, ensuring that its eyes stayed shut. In fact, the encounter with the statue kickstarted changes that I hadn't anticipated. I found myself distancing from coffee altogether, switching to tea to minimize any supernatural incidents. My nightly routine shifted as well. No more late-night TV binges, just early reading and restful sleep. I even began composting, desperately trying to avoid another disastrous incident involving the trash compactor. These rules, as terrifying as they were, had inadvertently pushed me toward becoming a better person. However, old habits were hard to shake. One morning, running late and stressed, I raced out the door without checking the cat statue. Traffic was insane, cars inching forward in frustratingly tiny increments. Anxiety pulsed in my temples as I kept glancing at the clock, the red numbers taunting my lateness. A strange sensation prickled at the back of my neck. A warm, damp breath like somebody was right behind me. I whipped my head around. Nothing. I turned off the radio, blaming it for the muffled whispers that I swore I was hearing, but silence only heightened the sensation. Paranoia began seeping in, a thick fog clouding my rational mind. Had the cat's eyes been open when I left? Had I been careless again? Just as traffic began moving though, I tried calming my breath. A small figure darted in front of my car. There was a sickening thud and a horrifying screech of tires. Brakes squealed and honks echoed as vehicles swerved around me. Hard hammering, I stumbled out to the front of my car. There, sprawled motionless on the asphalt, was the body of a small girl no older than 10. My blood ran cold. Panic gripped my chest as I kneeled beside her, gently turning her over. I recoiled, stumbling back in horror. Her face, it wasn't human. Wide, glassy, feline eyes stared up at me, her features grotesquely distorted into something cat-like, with sharp teeth protruding from her open mouth. The creature slowly began to rise, limbs jerking unnaturally. Its gaze locked onto mine as a sinister, toothy grin spread across it. Adrenaline took over. I sprinted back to my car, slamming the door shut and speeding away recklessly. Glancing in my rearview mirror, the cat girl stood motionless, her hands slowly waving as if to say goodbye. My breathing was ragged, heart hammering violently in my chest as the image of her twisted, smiling face burned itself into my memory. When I got to the office, I rushed to my cubicle, panting like a dog and feeling completely disoriented. The events of that morning kept replaying in my mind like a horror reel on loop. As I moved through the dimly lit aisles, I swore that I saw silhouettes darting between desks, dark, menacing shapes lingering at the corner of my vision, but I refused to look directly. My heart hammered in my chest, each step closer to my cubicle feeling like a step deeper into a nightmare. Finally reaching my tiny workspace, I collapsed into my chair and tucked my head into the corner, shutting my eyes tightly. For a moment there was silence, but then sounds emerged around me. Strange, shuffling movements, whispers blended grotesquely with cat-like meows, inching closer to my ears. Panic surged through me. My body broke into a cold sweat, drops sliding down my temples and splashing onto the desk. "Please stop," I muttered weakly, gripping the desk so hard that my knuckles turned white. The cubicle door swung open suddenly, and I spun around, almost jumping out of my skin. It was Patrick, who looked even more frightened than I felt. "Dude, I've been knocking for like 5 minutes," he said nervously. His eyes widened in confusion and mild horror. "Whoa, funny prank, man, very creepy." "What are you talking about, Patrick? I'm not pulling any pranks," I snapped, wiping sweat off my forehead. Right, totally." Patrick gestured nervously at his own face, circling his eyes. "Cool contacts or whatever." He backed away awkwardly, shooting anxious glances over his shoulder as he went. Confused, I quickly touched my face, feeling for anything unusual, but I found nothing. Anxiety growing, I stumbled toward the restroom. On the way, heads peered curiously from behind partitions, whispered voices drifting away whenever I looked. The restroom lights buzzed softly as I rushed to the mirror. My eyes had changed. The pupils were slit, elongated vertically like a cat's, piercingly unnatural. I staggered backward, holding my breath to stop a scream that threatened to rip out of me. "No, no, no!" I scrambled out of the bathroom, bolting toward the parking lot, feeling dozens of invisible eyes burning into my back. As I drove home, shadows stretched and twisted alongside the road, dark figures slipping through the trees, watching my every movement. At my apartment, my hands trembled violently as I unlocked the door. The cat statue awaited me inside, its head now turned directly toward the entrance, its eyes still shut, but its posture radiating hostility. Instead of its usual beckoning pose, it was hunched, hissing slightly and ready to leap. Turning away for just a split second to hang up my keys, I spun back around to see its eyes suddenly wide open, two hollow black voids staring into me. My pulse roared in my ears. Shaking uncontrollably, I approached it, cautiously reaching out to pet the statue's head. The moment my fingertips brushed against its cold and ceramic surface, a sharp, agonizing pain exploded in my eyes, as though needles stabbed deep into them, twisting viciously. I collapsed, writhing and screaming in anguish, hands clutching at my face, feeling invisible claws gripping and tearing at my eyeballs. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the pain vanished. Breathless and terrified, I blinked rapidly, my vision clearing. The statue was back in its usual position, eyes closed peacefully. Racing to the bathroom, my reflection now showed my own eyes, the horror erased like it never had happened. A hysterical, relieved laugh escaped my lips. I shakily texted my boss. Went home sick, taking a few days off. The next morning, another dreaded notification pinged my phone awake. My heart sank slightly, anticipating more torment, but I quickly opened the email. Rule 5, always leave exactly one light on when you leave your home. I exhaled slowly, wrote the rule down carefully, and committed it to memory. The rules were escalating, and the consequences of ignoring them were more severe each time. It was clear that I couldn't afford mistakes any longer. I spent the following days organizing my apartment, cleaning meticulously as paranormal podcasts murmured softly in the background. Ironically, I had never been superstitious, often dismissing stories of ghosts and demons as attention-seeking nonsense. But given my recent experiences, I wanted to know more, understand the unexplainable. Eventually, another email arrived. Rule 6. Always greet animals you encounter with a nod or a polite word. I chuckled out loud upon reading this, picturing how absurd I would look greeting every stray animal, but my amusement didn't last long. It started with squirrels and birds. I'd be strolling along, lost in thoughts, when a squirrel on a nearby fence would suddenly freeze mid-chew, its tiny head pivoting toward me in an unnatural slow motion, eyes as black as polished stones. The birds, too, would halt their flight, frozen mid-air as if somebody had pressed pause, until I would greet them. Only then would they resume their lives, the birds chirping merrily, squirrels scampering away like normal creatures. Even people's pets acted oddly. Once, a golden retriever on its daily walk stopped and rotated its head mechanically, staring me down with eyes so dark they seemed bottomless. "Good afternoon," I said awkwardly, causing its tail to wag enthusiastically again. The dog's owner laughed, a pretty woman around my age. "Oh, he likes you," she smiled warmly. We struck up a conversation that flowed effortlessly, and before I knew it, I had her number saved as April. This strange set of rules which had once terrified me began shaping my life into something better. My apartment was cleaner, my sleep deeper, and now even my social life was improving. For the first time in years, boredom was losing its grip on me. But just as I had thought I had found some stability, another email arrived, plunging my heart into ice-cold dread. Rule 7. Avoid eye contact with any reflection during a power outage. I stared at my screen, feeling anxiety rise like bile in my throat. A shiver ran down my spine, dread pooling in my gut. Something felt deeply wrong. I packed up quickly, eager to get home and assess the situation. But as soon as I opened my door, my stomach sank. The power was out. Darkness pressed heavily against my eyes, and the shadows seemed thicker than usual. I cursed silently. How long had the power been off? I had broken rule number 5, the one about always leaving a single light on. I turned on my phone flashlight, revealing chaos. Dishes piled in the sink, Crumbs scattered across counters, furniture shifted unnaturally. The lucky Nico cat statue toppled on its side, glaring at the wall. Moving quickly, I headed for my closet to retrieve a battery-powered lamp. I reminded myself repeatedly to not look at the mirror, walking carefully past the bathroom, my eyes fixed firmly ahead. And then just as I grabbed the lamp, I heard it. A soft, eerie whisper that sounded very familiar. "Jamie, Jamie, over here," said the voice. It was a child's voice. My voice from when I was younger, but twisted with malicious intent. My heart raced, sweat prickling at the back of my neck. "Come on, Jamie, we have so much to talk about," it continued, tapping against the bathroom mirror as if it were a window. I shut my eyes, took a shaky breath, and I exited my bathroom. I placed the lamp on the kitchen counter, its pale glow barely penetrating the darkness. I reached for my phone, desperate for the comfort of something familiar, but froze when another voice, a darker, colder one, interrupted me. "Well, you're a disappointment." The voice was deep and dripping with venom. My heart seized, my phone slipping from numb fingers and clattering to the floor, the screen cracking sharply against the tiles. In the dim glow of the battery-powered lamp, shadows stretched long and distorted across the kitchen walls. Slowly, my eyes lifted toward the round mirror in the living room, drawn by a force that I couldn't resist. My reflection stared back, pale, hollowed eyes, terrified. And then slowly the mirror face began to change. Its lips curled upward, stretching into an impossibly wide, hideous grin that seemed to split the cheeks unnaturally. The flesh around its left eye sagged downward, deforming into a misshapen oval, skin drooping and distorting like melted wax. "Just look at what you've become," it said cruelly. I stood paralyzed, breath trapped in my throat, feeling a cold sweat trace lines down my spine. My reflection continued to twist and deform, features morphing grotesquely, the mocking smile never fading. Without thinking, my hand rose shakily to my own face, fingers brushing over my skin, frantically ensuring everything was still where it belonged. "You're pathetic," voice dark and echoing. "You've had every chance, Jamie, every opportunity handed to you on a silver platter. And look at you, working to live, living to work. Nothing but a hamster spinning in his little wheel." A sickening laugh escaped the mirror, thick and mocking, as its tongue lolled out unnaturally, forked and slack like a serpent's. Every twisted syllable dripped venom. Somehow deep in my chest, I found the strength to speak up, though the words trembled and faltered like a frightened child's. I have changed. I've gotten better. I've been waking." The reflection instantly mocked me, my voice shifting to the high-pitched, spiteful taunt of a child. My child voice. "Oh, stuttering again, Jamie. Can't get a word out. Oh, you've changed all right, thanks to your precious rules." The last word thundered violently, echoing through my bones. "Pathetic. Can't you think for yourself? Clearly not. After you pissed away your grandparents' inheritance on nothing, look at you now, stuttering again, scared of your own reflection. What are you?" I barely whispered, backing away slowly, legs shaking beneath me. My twisted reflection rose, elongating horribly, its limbs stretching thin and spider-like. It loomed, towering within the confines of the mirror. "I'm you, Jamie," it hissed, drawing out each word with sadistic delight. "All your sins, your regrets, your miserable existence all in one place. And I'm tired of being trapped here." Without warning, it rushed backward and slammed it violently into the glass. The mirror cracked, splintering outward as the entire wall shuddered. I stumbled back, collapsing to the floor and scrambling frantically into a corner, helplessly watching as it backed up again, readying itself like a predator for another strike. The reflection lunged once more, its distorted face a twisted mask of glee and rage, smashing into the mirror. The walls shook and thin cracks spiderwebbed outward, nearly shattering the barrier between us. It backed away, panting with an animalistic hunger. "I'm sorry," I stammered desperately, barely recognizing my own voice. I've been trying, I've been getting better." "Better?" it mocked, viciously leaning closer. Its voice softened again, whispering intimately. "You're nothing without these rules, Jamie. They're the only thing holding your worthless life together. Admit it." I curled backward, my back pressing painfully into the corner of the kitchen counter, arms wrapping protectively around my knees. My breathing became shallow, ragged gasps echoing in the claustrophobic darkness. "Admit it," the reflection screamed. I stepped back for another attack, teeth sharpening, arms growing impossibly long. I wanted to run, to scream, to throw something at it, but fear held me in place. I could only watch helplessly as it charged forward again, its grotesque features contorting in anticipation. At the very last moment, just as the mirror seemed poised to explode outward, the lights flickered back to life, blinding me momentarily. My breath echoed loudly in my ears, and the words, my own twisted voice from the mirror, repeated like a dark mantra, each syllable carving deeper into my psyche. Everything it said, every accusation, every bitter truth was true. I had buried those parts of myself for years, and now they crawled beneath my skin. I spent the next hour sinking deeper into darkness and despair until eventually I forced myself up, moving like a marionette with tangled strings. I began to clean the apartment, trying to reclaim some sense of normalcy, but it felt different now. Something else was here. It lingered in the corners and the soft creaks of doors opening and closing quietly. Footsteps whispered from the living room to the kitchen, pausing just long enough to send chills down my spine. Yet every time I rushed to investigate, nothing but emptiness greeted me. And days became a blur of anxious adherence to the rules, waiting in fearful anticipation for what horror would appear next. A notification jolted me from my thoughts one evening, and my heart skipped a beat until I saw it was just a text message from April. Relief washed over me, and I smiled as I read her invitation to dinner. Eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere of my home, I accepted and got ready quickly. Before leaving, I glanced at the cat statue. Its eyes stared wide open, accusingly and impatiently. "A needy little thing, aren't you?" I chuckled uneasily, petting its cold porcelain head. "I'll be right back." Dinner with April was a breath of fresh air. Her laugh was genuine, her stories engaging, and as we talked, I felt a rare sense of connection. She had recently been promoted to a manager at a grocery company and was temporarily traveling to train at a distant store. The evening had passed by quickly enough, leaving us both eager for another meeting. As she drove away, I practically skipped to my car, the weight of recent horrors momentarily lifted. Back home, comfortable in bed with Carl Sagan's Cosmos illuminating softly on my Kindle, my phone buzzed. Anticipating a message from April, my grin faded as I recognized the familiar email notification instead. Dread surged as I opened it slowly, preparing my notebook with trembling fingers. Rule 8. Avoid looking out the windows after hearing an unknown animal sound. Almost as if on cue, an unnatural wailing pierced the stillness outside, an anguished blend of a deer's scream and the growl of a mountain lion. It started distant but grew louder, angrier, moving closer. Suddenly, something heavy slammed into the outside wall, scraping frantically at the window pane. The blinds rattled, my heart pounding painfully in my chest. I froze under my covers, a terrified child once again. The wailing mutated, struggling to form words. "Let me in." Each word was strained and desperate. My breath came in shallow, rapid gasps as the voice began to change, becoming softer and disturbingly familiar. "Jamie," it purred sweetly, now eerily like April's voice. "I had such a great time tonight. Let me in, babe, it's freezing out here." On the word freezing, its voice broke into a feral and guttural snarl. I didn't move an inch, clutching my covers tightly. "Oh, stay out there and freeze," I muttered, more bravado than bravery. Yet it continued relentless, cycling through voices, my mother, my sister, close friends, each imitation more accurate, more heart-wrenching, until they became indistinguishable from reality. But logic prevailed. I was on the 4th floor, and there was no way my 60-year-old mother or anybody else was perched on the windowsill outside. I clenched my eyes shut, enduring the nightmarish chorus until finally, mercifully, dawn began to creep through the edges of the blinds. A silhouette lingered briefly, blocking the sunrise, and then dissolved slowly, fading into nothing. I released a shaky breath, finally rising to start the day. For months, no more rules arrived. Life took on a strange new rhythm. Oddly, these terrifying rules brought structure and even growth to my life. I broke Rule 7 intentionally once, staring into a mirror during another power outage, confronting my demons face to face, turning my fears into tools for self-improvement. I bought noise-canceling earplugs to silence whatever mimicked voices outside my window at night. Even Rule 5, though its consequences remained obscure, seemed manageable despite the random noises and occasional shadows drifting through my apartment. Perhaps I had simply gained a quiet roommate. April left town for her training, and gradually our text had slowed to silence. Maybe she found somebody new or just lost interest. Whatever the reason, though, I accepted it, feeling more equipped to handle disappointment than ever before. One evening, returning home from work, an envelope waited jammed into my door. I hesitated before opening it, already feeling dread pulling in my gut. Inside, a single note read, "Rule 8.5, and whatever you do, never ever." The half rule settled in my mind like a persistent itch, slowly eroding my sanity. Paranoia became my shadow. It followed me everywhere, whispering uncertainties into my ears. For months afterward, I had glanced nervously over my shoulder, convinced I had heard somebody softly call my name when nobody was around. Each time, I was greeted by empty air and silence so deep it felt unnatural. When I walked through the park, everybody's shadows seemed off, subtly distorted or moving at different speeds from their owners, mocking me while everyone else moved on obliviously. I would stop abruptly, staring at my own shadow, swearing it twitched or shifted, daring me to challenge its reality. I started doubting myself again. Maybe Patrick and my coworkers had been dousing me all along, orchestrating some sick, elaborate prank. Maybe I had finally cracked from the stress. But even as I rationalized, my mind spun endlessly back to that unfinished rule, driving me mad with speculation. Eventually, even this heightened state of fear grew dull, becoming just another mundane part of life. The routines formed by the rules became tedious again, color fading once more from my daily existence. As I'm sitting at my desk typing this out, another notification pinged softly on my screen. My heartbeat quickened as I clicked open the email. Just 2 simple words. Bored again? A wide grin spread across my face. Leon Knott, Meat Gasher, Rain, The One Woodsman, Army of Meerkats, Santos Adrian, SWAT, Ty Can't Play, Raphael, Smiling Cat, Dragon Slayer 048, Die Screaming, Nelson Asada, Sanjay Antham, Della Magara, Jimmy Griffin, Caden Gibbler, Malcolm Black, Damon McCory, Sleepy Shroomy, Big Country Allen, Dino, Mark Norman, Miss Eldridge, Kathy McGuire, MP Massacre 91, Justin Fotenauer, Takio Zarilla, Deggy, Goonology,